got everyone in for the moment. I'm excited, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us for Runaway Wednesday. For those, I think I know almost everyone on the call. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kim Temple with Runaway Realty in Puerto Morelos, Mexico, the best little beach town in the world, according to us. And tonight I'm joined by our team members, Keith Smith and Laura Perez. Yes, admit some people here. And we're excited to have you all here today. And I'm kind of excited we have a smaller group tonight because that allows for a better conversation, I think. The last few meetings have been pretty large, but first of all, welcome, and feel free to leave your, well, we can have a little chat at the first and then I guess turn your microphones off. We are recording the meetings, so if you don't want to be on our video, which we will post to YouTube, you can turn off your video camera at any time. And I think that's it for my housekeeping. I hope everybody is doing well. We are doing super well in Puerto Morelos. We're out of the frantic, crazy February of high season into March, which is also high season, and we're about to hit kind of the stride of Puerto Morelos, which is spring break, and then going into Easter. So things are a little bit busy around here. I don't know if any of you, anyone else is here in town, but it's a little bit crazy. There's like no park. Well, they're also doing road construction, which is always happens during high season. So there's like no parking anywhere, and everything's super crowded, but it's kind of a fun time to be here. And if things go as normal, it's really gonna slow down after Easter. So we're almost through a high season that felt a lot more normal than the last two, to be honest. And so that's good news for us. We remain in our green category for the COVID restrictions. There still are COVID restrictions. There's still a mask requirement, although it seems to be, you have to wear masks when you go into restaurants and businesses, but it seems to be loosening up a bit. I don't know, Keith and Laura, do you feel like it's a little bit more, yeah. It seems more lax, so that's exciting, and I hope that we are going to keep moving in that direction. In other big news, there was an iguana in my guest bedroom yesterday, so that was fun. A giant iguana just on my, like, I somehow got into our house, probably through the dog door, and I'm guessing the dogs chased it. It got up on a dresser, knocked over a lamp, and was perched on top of the knocked over lamp shade. Like a big iguana. I'm not talking a gecko, like
Godzilla size.
Godzilla was in the guest bedroom, and then Gabrielle's like, let's just grab it. And I said, I'm not touching that thing. It can kill us. It'll probably eat the dogs. So we left it there overnight. I had to I'm wearing a dirty dress because I couldn't go in because my clothes are in that room. I was terrified. So finally today, this afternoon, we had some workers there, and one nice gentleman agreed to go in and get the iguana, and the iguana's fine. He was not harmed, but he's fast and he was hiding, so they were able to get him and take him and relocate him back outside with the rest of his family. I just hope that he didn't enjoy his time inside and want to come back. I hope not. I think he was terrified and there was nothing to eat because he was locked in a bedroom. So that was my excitement this week.
Kim, we've had a big one twice now, has fallen or jumped, I don't know, over the wall into our back patio, and then he can't climb back up because we're completely enclosed. So Bruce has had to rescue him twice now, and he had to do it earlier today, and he puts like some thick gloves on to do it, but the iguana bit him today when he was picking it up to put it up on the, did you say through the glove? He bit you through the glove?
No.
Oh, no.
The glove.
But he had the gloves on, but the iguana bit him when he was picking it up to put it back up on the top of the wall. So.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know. I could have called Bruce for help with this.
Yeah, evidently you can call Bruce if you need an iguana evacuation. He's your guy.
Well, I was scared.
Have gloves will travel.
Yeah. I was scared because I've heard that their claws are super sharp and they have sharp little teeth. And then Gabrielle last night so he was on the lampshade, then he hid when we noticed him. We could see his tail. And Gabrielle's like, well, I guess I could grab his tail, but I guess they can like release their tails. Their tails just come off. And he was like, I don't want to maim the iguana and I don't want a really angry iguana without his tail. So anyway, that's why we left it there overnight. But the things you learn, I did not have to deal with this in Colorado.
I assume that they just travel alone. He doesn't like have a girlfriend in your closet.
I hope not. And I hope it's not a girl, because I don't know how to tell the difference between a boy and a girl.
Oh.
I was like, do they lay eggs? I need to Google that. Hopefully there's not a nest of iguanas. But we have a lot of guilt because we put in a pool in July. And then some of you may have seen this on video. It was right before the hurricane. I went out and there was something giant in my pool and I thought maybe one of the palm leaves came down and it was an iguana that was drowned.
Oh.
And I think it was the granddaddy that's been there forever. Like I named him a boy named Sue after the Johnny Cash song. And I was so sad because it's a whole family. Like I think it's generations of iguanas that live at our property and on our wall. So now maybe it was revenge for that. I don't know, but he's gone now, or she. The iguana is gone. Okay. All right, somebody's trying to join that says admin, so let's see who this is. All right. So tonight, guys, we're gonna talk about kind of everything that you don't see when you watch those 22-minute episodes on HGTV of Mexico Life and House Centers International. We're going to talk about kind of the buying process and what goes on behind the scenes, how to find properties, and you know what happens when you do find the property that you want. Where do we go from there, and how do we get to the point where you're taking title to a property? So this discussion that we're going to have tonight presumes that you already have the basic information about, you know, yes, foreigners can own property. It's all sales are cash, there's no financing available, and the buyer pays closing costs, and that you have some understanding of the costs, and that you've kind of gotten to the point where you can set your price range that you want to look at. And I guess, you know, the first thing, really the overarching thing that we want you to remember, you know, before you sit down with a realtor and you have a cocktail and you pick out 3 properties and go look at them, you need to understand that you're considering buying a property in a great, you know, market. It's a good investment, but it's a foreign country. You are buying property in a foreign country where you probably don't speak the language, don't read the language, don't understand the legal system surrounding the transfer of title. And, you know, expectations and culture are very different here, especially around real estate. So I find a lot of times that that's kind of lost. People don't remember that they're here, they're having a great time. People speak English, they feel very comfortable. We call it margarita fever, where you just kind of check your common sense at the door. The taxi driver speaks English, invites you to his house, and you know, meet his family, and then he wants to sell you some land and you give him money. So like that, I mean, I know people laugh, but that stuff happens all the time. And we want to help you not do that. But part of why it happens is people forget this is a different country where you don't have the same rights as a citizen, and you know, you don't understand the legal framework. So this is not to scare you, because it can all be done very safely and confidently if you educate yourself like you're doing now by joining us and work with professionals. But don't assume, I guess, culturally or legally, that buying property here is completely the same as buying in the US or Canada. It's just not. And the biggest reason why it's not is that our real estate market is kind of like, I call it like the wild, wild west. It's not regulated and controlled like it is in the US and Canada, and probably many other places around the world, but those are the markets I'm more familiar with. And Keith is very familiar because he worked in the market in the US. I didn't. I practiced law there. I didn't do real estate. But probably, I don't know, Keith maybe has more gray hairs now because he's also had to learn a new market. And yeah, and it's very different. So I mean, so the main thing to understand is it's a little bit like the Wild West in that it's not highly regulated. In fact, it's really not regulated at all. In our state of Mexico, there is a real estate licensing requirement. They say it's on the books, but it's not enforced. And so while there was great enthusiasm for it when it was enacted about 5 years ago, very few people have bought into the program and gotten licensed. No, because no one's enforcing it. So we have a situation where anyone and everyone could call themselves a real estate agent. There's no consequences if a person who calls themselves an agent lies to you or acts unethically or illegally, defrauds you. There's just no consequences. So in that sense, it's very different from what we know from having licensed agents in the US and Canada, and having a very strict MLS, which is kind of a group of people, that association that gets together and you can file grievances, and anyway, you can have someone's license removed and all that kind of stuff. So that's very different here. So it's kind of a free for all in that sense. There is no MLS, which means there's no central source for information on properties that are for sale anywhere in Quintana Roo. I've heard on the other coast of Mexico, they do have a more formal MLS system that the agents have bought into, and it's a little bit more controlled there, but that's not what's happening on this coast of Mexico. So there's no MLS, which means there's no central source of real estate listings. There's kind of some default websites that have become like an MLS, which is a big one, which many of you have run into already, is Point Two Homes, point2homes.com. A lot of people post listings on there, but I just always want to caution you that listings posted on Point Two are notoriously unreliable. Anyone and everyone can post. You don't have to be a realtor. No one's checking the veracity of the information. You're not in trouble if you post the wrong square footage, the wrong amenity, there doesn't have a garage or not. You don't get in trouble for any of that. So it is a tool that you can use to find properties here, but it's not a regulated thing, and not information that you can rely upon like you can with an actual MLS in the US and Canada. Likewise, there's other websites out there that come up. I'm forgetting the name of the other ones. Keith, what is the name of the other real estate? There's one in Quintana Roo that people use, in Wayblaze 24 or something like that. So there's some other websites that come up when you look for listings, but same thing. No one's regulating it. Anyone can post on it. They can put whatever information they want, right or wrong. There's no consequences. The kind of old-fashioned way of just walking around and calling off of for sale signs is also kind of pointless here. One, it's very culturally acceptable to just throw a for sale sign on your property, whether you're willing to sell it or not, or whether you have the paperwork, or whether you're going to ever answer the phone. Like, you'll see a ton of for sale signs where no one's ever going to respond to you because it's not really for sale. They just kind of were going to wait and see if somebody offers them a lot of money, and then maybe they'll take it. So that's not a great way to look either. In our market, there's, I guess, in terms of, well, maybe I'll get to this later. So you're probably wondering, like, well, then how do you find properties in Puerto Morelos? And I will tell you the best way to do that is to work with an agent that's, well, us, for one thing, but it's best to work with an agent who's, professional, has referrals or recommendations, and who works in one specific market. Because the other thing, sorry, this was the second thing on my list that I just skipped. The other thing is that there's no comparable sales information available. I can't go to the city and say who owns this. I have the address of a lot and I need to know who owns it. They won't tell me. It's all private. Likewise, I can't go and find out what your neighbor paid for their house. That's all confidential information. Public records do not exist in that sense. So it makes it even more important that you work with someone with experience in a market who can tell you, we've done so many sales, and so we have an idea of what things are selling per square foot or per square meter. And we can advise you on whether what you're seeing is a realistic sale price or people are just nuts. Because not only is not having this information a detriment to buyers, it's a detriment to sellers, because they're hearing, real people lie about what they sold their property for, or they listed it $3 million and then it sells and people are like, wow, like George got $3 million for that property. No, George didn't get anywhere near $3 million for that property. But because we don't have access to the information, it's very subject to perception. You see listing prices and you think that's what things are selling for, but many times, not all the time, and it's getting a little different, but many times the listing price has really nothing to do with what the actual sale price is. So sellers will often just pick a number. I'm willing to sell my property for 1.5 million, even though my agent, Kim, has come to me and shown me comps of actual sales over the last however many years of properties similar to mine, justifying a lower price. They don't care. They'll just price it at $1 million or whatever they want to price it at, and just wait until they get a buyer at that point. Because the other thing is they're not paying a lot to maintain their property. So it's can be hard to get a seller into a position, you all are used to a market that's driven a lot by lenders. For one thing, the lender does an appraisal and tells you how much money they're going to give you on that property. None of that exists here. We don't have lenders. So no one is forcing people into following any kind of logical progression in terms of pricing, right? So anyway, it's interesting. And I don't want to sound too negative, because obviously things get bought and sold all the time here, and it's a great investment, but it is very different. And if you come in with the assumption that it's going to be the same, you're going to be really disappointed and frustrated, because it's hard not to have access to the information that you're used to having. We're used to being able to push a button and see like, oh, well, every other house in this neighborhood sold for 250. So why is this one 375? Well, here it's 375 because that's what the seller wants. They're not going to take anything else. And they can't be pushed by a lender because there's no lender involved. So it's interesting. And also why it's important to work with an experienced realtor in a local community, because we can actually advise you on that. Some realtors, especially in this area, they specialize in the whole Riviera Maya, which I don't really understand how they can do that, because again, the information's not available. So I wouldn't know how to counsel you on what a property is worth in Tulum, whether the asking price is too much. I don't know how to counsel you on that in Playa del Carmen, in Isla Mujeres, in Cozumel. It's just, I can tell you what they want for it, but it's hard to give professional advice when you don't have the background information. So anyway, that's why we stick to Puerto Morelos. We've got 10 years now here of many, many, many transactions. We know where the prices are going. We know what the price per square foot are, although that varies from block to block. It's that all that depends on how close you are to the ocean and all that good stuff. Anyway, so it's better to work with somebody professional and experienced. And also the experience is important, probably more important than a license, because even anyone can get licensed. You don't have to have any experience, but you really need to know what questions to ask here. And you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of tricky title situations come up. And if you are working with someone who's just like, oh, well, I moved to Mexico and now I'm going to sell real estate because I just decided that I could, but they don't know the questions to ask, you can really get yourself into trouble and expensive trouble. This isn't, these aren't mistakes that you'll just may cost you a little bit of money. These are all cash purchases, and you could lose your life savings kind of, if you're not careful here. So I hate to sound so negative, but you just have to really work with someone experienced and professional, because this is your money. For many people, this is their retirement. This is their retirement home. And you just can't afford to trust someone who's doing this as a hobby, doesn't, doesn't really know what they're doing. Okay, any questions? Sorry, I feel like I've been talking straight for 10 minutes or 20.
Kim, you say, of course, that you and your other colleagues at Runaway know what your listings are worth. Do you also have an informal group? Like, do you talk to other real estate agents and kind of have a little group of trusted people that you work with?
Yeah, so I mean, we can show you this later in my presentation, but I mean, we can show you anything listed by a professional agent. And by that, I mean, we have a group of agents that we feel comfortable working with. We know they have education or experience. They have not been unethical, kicked out of a real estate association, any of that good stuff. And who are willing to work with other agents, because a lot of times what happens here is an agent will take a listing, which is funny, when they don't have a website, they just put a sign on a property, but they won't work with other agents. So it's basically a pocket listing. They're only going to sell to their buyer. And so we run into that quite a bit, which is super frustrating. And they don't tell the seller that's what they're doing. Otherwise the seller would never agree to that, right? Because you want all the eyes on your property you can get. So yes, so we have, we have a real estate association. We're members of the biggest real estate association in Mexico, which, by the way, you can grieve your realtor under that. We're bound by ethical rules. We can get in trouble with them, and we don't want to, because that's a great source of education and professional, when I have an issue that I haven't seen before, I have trusted people I can call who've been doing this for 30 years and all that good stuff. So we have those realtors that we work with. And then in Puerto Morelos, we have a group that is established and trustworthy that we work with. And so of course we get information on their listings, and we can show you their listings. We try to, although it's not easy because there's no central place, we try to keep our hands and fingers on what's happening in every neighborhood to make sure that our buyers know everything that's listed. It's somewhat impossible to do that because people put up signs every day. We're not driving around every neighborhood every single day, but we're really spending a lot of time on outreach all the time to try to find all the listings for you and to find out if they're legitimate, right? Does the seller know it's for sale? Does anyone have the paperwork? Does the seller know they have a capital gain? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot that goes into a sale, and it's not just on the buyer side. When we take a listing, and I won't digress too far on this because I know this is probably not that interesting to you, but like when we take a listing, we actually check the ID against we look at the title. Is this a real title? Have you paid your property taxes? Are you aware that you're going to have capital gains? Because the last thing we want is a buyer to get involved, invested, put money down, and then find out the seller wants to change the price because they didn't know they had to pay taxes. So we do all that education up front before we put it on our website, so that we know when we get a buyer, we're ready to go. There may be a few things to do, whatever, but we know about it and there are no big surprises. And we know we're dealing with the actual person who's entitled to sell that property. And I cannot tell you now in 10 years how many times I've run into situations with realtors where that's not the case. They're not representing the real seller. They don't have the paperwork. Or the construction's not registered, or they don't have title, or someone passed away and they never put it in the name of the other, like all of these things have happened. So it's just, that's when experience is handy, because we've seen these situations play out. But yeah, so we're all sharing information among a trusted group of agents. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. Oops. Any other questions?
Actually, Kim, I'd like to make a comment, because we've worked with you and we've worked with other realtors down in the Puerto Morelos area
What?
in the past.
Peter?
No, and to be honest with you, I like the way you handle things, because when we came to you, you had things up front and visible for us. And what you were saying about other realtors giving information out, they didn't have that information. When we started working with you, everything, you had a system that was set up and is very good. I appreciate your system.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think the scariest, you're already scared to buy in a foreign country. It's already unfamiliar and nerve-wracking. The last thing you need is to then have some surprises, right? So we
Yep.
work really hard to minimize those or make sure you know that we can handle them, right? We can't foresee everything. Things happen. But when you're
And-
working with a good team, we can handle it.
And you're exactly right. You know, we have what I call the gringo philosophy, because it's not like buying a house in the States. We don't go in and have everything down pat, and having somebody that has been through the system like you have and has everything, your outlines and stuff like that. I can't say how much I appreciate all the stuff that you've been doing. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bill. I did not pay you for that. I would like a disclaimer on it.
Nope, you did not pay me for that at all. I just wanted to
No, I
make comment
appreciate
to
it.
that.
Thank you.
I would like to add additionally that on the flip side of it, yes, I know we're talking about buying, but about selling. It's important if you're looking to sell, and we got into this with our seller. He offered our home to us before he had actually spoken full on with Kim, and he offered our home to us at a different price than what I think Kim would have suggested. So I would suggest that before doing so, that you reach out to Kim or a real estate professional before speaking to people in a restaurant or so on and so forth, to make sure that you're getting the best return on your dollar, so that you're matching what is consistent with the market. I do feel like, even though our seller is honoring the price that he quoted us literally in a restaurant, he might have been able to do better if he had done his homework and reached out to Kim ahead of time before speaking. In the end, fortunately, he's a stand-up guy, and he's so far honoring his word. But it's something to keep in mind, down the road, if you choose to sell, please also reach out to that professional before you speak.
And that brings up a good point kind of with the margarita fever thing, which is that everybody has an opinion or a property to sell you. And it's really in your best interest to do this in a more methodical way. Find a realtor that you're comfortable with, figure out what your price range is, and then go from there, rather than working backwards. Like, oh, I saw a sign and I called the person, and here's how much it is, and I think I'm in love with this house, before you've really even figured out for sure what neighborhood you want to be and what you're, those tend to not go well when we start that way with, you've already fallen in love with a house that maybe has some fatal flaws. The seller won't agree to use escrow, the seller doesn't have title, the seller wants you to do something very risky. It's very difficult when a buyer has gone that far and then comes to us and then doesn't want to hear what we have to say about maybe this isn't the right house because of these legal reasons. It's great. I love that you love it, but let's find one where we can transfer title and feel more safe about it. So anyway, all that stuff happens, and it is important to keep in mind. So I don't want to rain on anyone's parade. It's so much fun to fall in love with a house, but probably better to start here, and let's go look and find the ones that we could really transfer title safely. And the other thing is, which I had later, sorry, my outline is like out the door. We're off the outline. The other thing is, when you're working with an agent here, well, this market's a little weird. If you contact a seller or a listing agent, they often take the position that if you come back later and say, oh yeah, but I'm working with Runaway Realty with Kim or Keith or Gabrielle. Oh, I forgot to introduce Gabrielle. He's my husband and partner, and he's not on the call tonight. And I want them to represent me in the sale, they'll say no. sorry, you contacted us without a realtor and now we're not going to let you use a realtor, which that should be a huge red flag to anybody, or we're not going to pay a commission because you contacted us directly without coming through a realtor. And that can get kind of messy because you don't want to forfeit your right to be represented in a sale because you called off of a sign. So it's much better if you see something that you like, you see a sign you want us to call on, send it to us. Let us make the first contact, register you as a client, get the information and try to do the dirty work from there and then decide if that's something you want to go see. So, okay. Keith, am I missing anything on this looking process?
Not looking so far, Kim, but I don't know what's on your notes. Are you going to talk about the time required to close here?
Yes.
Because that's very different than people are used to in the US and Canada. And I think I find with my clients, probably the biggest frustration in the process is just the amount of time it takes.
Yeah. Gina? Oh, you got to turn on your.
Sorry.
That's
I
okay.
had a quick question before you move on
Sure.
to the process. Do you show bank-owned properties or
No.
only private sales or seller sales, I guess I should say?
There aren't a lot of bank-owned properties, and it's super tricky here because that's often an Infonavit issue. Are you familiar with that system?
No.
So in Mexico, when you work, you pay into a system that's called Infonavit that provides like subsidized mortgages. And so it's very difficult for someone to lose all of their rights to a property, which means it's very difficult to transfer title.
Right.
That
Gotcha.
owns property. If it's
I
a straight
remember-
up
Sorry.
No, go ahead. If it's a straight up
remember-
mortgage, which are also quite uncommon, then that may be a little bit different, but yeah, so we don't typically do that.
Okay. And I remember you saying in a previous webinar that it's very difficult to move people out of a property, that once they're living there, it's difficult to, I was just
Almost
curious about that.
impossible. Mhm.
Yeah.
Very, very expensive and it's a years long endeavor.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's another reason if someone's still occupying a property that's been foreclosed upon, it would be very difficult to get out, which is why mortgages are not common here
Right.
for that very reason.
Got it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Okay, so let's step forward to the happy scenario where you found a property that you love. And we're happy, there's, fireworks are going off, it's like dating, it's magical, you love everything about it. What do? We, if you're on HGTV, you write a super low offer and it gets accepted. In real life, we are going to pull together all the information that we have and talk to you about the values before we write an offer. Is this a legitimate, purchase price? Other things to consider, are you comfortable with the property as is? Do you think you're going to want to make a bunch of changes to it? All that kind of goes into deciding what kind of offer you want to make. We, just like in the US and Canada, we write up offers. The difference here is that an offer is not a legally binding document. So when we write an offer, we're really just attempting to establish basically a handshake agreement, gentleman's agreement with the seller on the big terms, price, time to closing, any other thing that you need to do. We're going to throw that in the offer. Submit the written offer. Oftentimes there's negotiations. Sometimes we'll submit all the negotiations in writing, but quite often we don't. It's more of a verbal negotiation between us and the seller or us and the agent of the seller. Come to an agreement on price and terms. We write that up and circulate that for signatures, and then we would move on with the closing process. So it's a little bit different in that in the US, at least, I'm not sure if it's Canada, someone Canadian can tell me, the offer is really a legally binding document. And so you want to put everything in the offer and you want to put a time limit on it. And you got to be careful that you don't leave anything out. You're covering a lot of ground with the offer. So here that's much, much different. We're really just doing the broad outlines of what we want to see happen and get an agreement on, because our goal is to get the property off the market, right? It's a pretty hot market. We really want to get it off. and try to get it under contract and keep going. This is a good point to bring up the closing times, which Keith mentioned. I think in the US, and because I didn't do it there, I'm not sure, and I don't remember, I think you set a closing date in your offer, or you offer a closing date. Here, we cannot do that. What we can do is, if you know you need more time to close, we can say, hey, it's February 1st, we're making this offer, but we know we don't have access to our money till July 1st, so we're gonna request closing on or before July 15th or something like that. You can write that in the offer, like asking for an extra time to close. You can't really specify a closing date. And the kind of sad reality here right now is that closings are taking up to 3 months minimum, just in the normal course of things. It's just taking that long to get through the process of either setting up a new fideicomiso or transferring a fideicomiso, which is the asset trust. Getting all the certificates of no liens and all that out of the municipality, getting the bank ready to go, getting the notario ready to go, all that is taking around 3 months right now. And the super frustrating thing is, because things have been so weird, basically since COVID, we used to be able to close in 30 to 45 days. They're not even comfortable ballparking. The attorneys are not even comfortable ballparking when we think we can close. So they are really reluctant to even to give us any idea when you can close until we're really getting very close to the point where we can close, which is so frustrating for buyers and sellers, because you need to make travel plans, or you need to know when to pull your money out, or, you know, all of that stuff can be so frustrating. And we know it because we're frustrated too, but that's just what they're doing now. They won't commit to any kind of closing date, and they don't want you to make travel plans, because right now kind of anything can happen. The whole system's overloaded. They were understaffed for, you know, almost 2 years. And in that 2 years, the market went on fire, not just in Puerto Morelos, but all of the Riviera Maya. So everyone is bogged down. They're just not moving things as fast as they used to be able to. It's just too much volume. So we're kind of, I hope that resolves, add more staff, or I don't know what they can do, but right now that's where we are. And so it's, you know, as Keith and I have both experienced this year, people get very unhappy and don't understand why we can't just pick a date. And that's why, because they won't, there's too many moving parts and too many people that have to be in the same place at the same time for us to pick a date very, very much in advance of our closing. So I'm sorry, but that is frustrating. Anything you want to add, Keith, on that point?
Yeah, it's just a little different here in Mexico, having sold real estate in the United States. When you purchase in the United States, your agent is much more responsible for all of the process leading up to the closing. Like, we prepare the offer, we prepare the purchase agreement. We're more involved with the preparation of the legal documents, and we sort of hold everything and coordinate everything and sort of move all the parts around that need to be moved. And then within 2 weeks, sometimes a little less, of the anticipated closing date, we send the closing package to the closing attorney's office, and we sort of hand everything off to them, and then they take over. And the way it happens here in Mexico is that everything is handed over to the attorneys very early in the process. So we're still involved. We still have contact with the attorneys. We still know what's going on, but the attorneys are really driving the transaction to closing rather than the agent. And I think that's where some of the frustration comes in, where clients want us, like Kim just said, to be able to set a closing date. And we just can't, because the parts of the transaction that are in our control, more so in the United States, and I kind of always assume Canada is similar, are not in our control necessarily here, as the attorneys that are really driving the transaction. So it's just up to them. So, I mean, all we can do is to check in with them and see what the progress is, and see when they might be able to set a closing date. And as Kim just said, also, they don't want to set the closing date until they're pretty close to the end of the process. And they can feel assured that they can stick to the date that they set, which I think is okay with the buyers in a lot of instances. If you tell a buyer, okay, they're done, we can close, do you guys want to come down in 2 or 3 weeks or something like this? They're like, fine, yes, they'll make travel plans, they'll come down. But then on the opposite side of that is the seller, oftentimes who is someone who's here already, or at least in Mexico. So when they find out that, the closing can take place, then maybe they're not as patient to wait another 2 or 3 weeks in order for the closing to actually take place. They want it to happen a little bit sooner because, of course, they want to get proceeds from their sale. So there's just a couple of little, things that have to be balanced out there. And I think what I want to share with my clients more so than anything is that so much of what you might expect us to have control over based on your previous real estate transactions in the United States or Canada, here it's on the attorney's table rather than on our table.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really realize that the realtors didn't get an attorney involved until much later, but
Hey, Kim,
uh-huh.
we, speaking of, timeframes on things, we actually bought our house on August 30th, and you guys were the seller's agent, and we had a really good buyer's agent, and everyone worked well together. But it's interesting because we just received an email this past week from the attorney that says our deed has now been filed and stamped. And we're coming down next month, so we're able to pick it up, which is nice. But that process took 7 months. And you do need those papers to do certain things, like I think I can't remember what you need them for, maybe change your electric bill or something to show proof that you own the house, or maybe it's for something. But I'm like, I keep waiting for my deed to be processed, but it finally got processed. But that's another process that takes a long time.
Yeah. So I'll get to that, but you're right that, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the closing process, because you bring up a good point. So
Real quick, Kim, before you get to closing, when you're making an offer, do you make an earnest deposit? And what is earnest money typically in Mexico? What percentage?
sure, in your offer, you would offer a certain amount of earnest money that we recommend that you would put into escrow. There is no standard. Even for Puerto Morelos, there's no standard amount. A lot of people offer 10%.
Okay.
Simply because when we go to contract, that's typically the penalty amount that you would forfeit if you pull out after you sign the contract. But you want to, if you're asking for delayed closing, then I would recommend that you offer much more earnest money, because you want them to know that you're serious, that it's going to be a super quick close. I mean, a lot of things go into how much earnest money you want to offer.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's no standard required amount. And some sellers are comfortable with more, and some are comfortable with 10% or less.
Okay, thanks.
But you're right, you would write that into the offer. So once we've, got an agreement on purchase price, terms, earnest money, we would solicit a closing cost estimate for you. And we would, at that time, also request an escrow agreement be prepared, assuming that your seller has agreed to use escrow. I want to discuss that really quick. So escrow is not something that is common at all in real estate transactions among Mexicans, Mexican citizens who don't need to have these fideicomiso trusts. Their transactions can move very quickly. And so it's much more common here that you would make an offer, go to a contract immediately. At the signing of the contract, you would give a hefty chunk, probably 50% or more of the purchase price. And then when the title is finally transferred and you go to sign that paperwork, the buyer would actually send the rest of the money directly to the seller while we're sitting at the closing table, and the seller will not sign the title until he's received that money in his account. Escrow makes that a little simpler because you could put the money in the escrow account ahead of time, ahead of the day of closing, and also earlier on in the transaction, and the money is held there safely on behalf of the seller. The seller can't take it, the buyer can't remove it after we've signed the purchase contract, they can't remove it without penalty. And so it is a very safe way to protect everyone in the transaction. And it's a very low cost for what I consider to be basically an insurance policy. Especially because transactions involving foreigners take so much time, up to 3 months. You don't want to give a seller an earnest money deposit and then hope that they're going to come back in 3 months. It'll be hard to get your money back. So using an escrow account, I think, is the safest way to proceed when we're doing a transaction here. And so at the very beginning, we'll get your closing cost quote, we'll get your escrow set up if everyone's in agreement to use it. Then once you've made your earnest money deposit, you will also make a deposit on your closing costs. And with that chunk of money in escrow or sent directly to the lawyer, depending on what the transaction is, they will prepare the purchase acquisition contract. That contract, which will be prepared in English and Spanish, that is the binding contract. So up until this point, we don't have a binding legal contract. Once you've signed the contract that's in English and Spanish, then we have then you're bound, the seller's bound to sell to you, you're bound to buy it. There's penalties if either of you fail to complete the transaction. And that contract is circulated for original signatures. In Mexico, it's changing a little bit. They are accepting electronic signatures for some things, but it's still, to be totally safe, it's better to have an original signature on a contract if you want to enforce it. So we circulate 3 copies of that contract around to wherever the buyers and sellers are. Everyone signs the same contract. Buyer keeps a copy, seller keeps a copy, the attorneys get a copy. And once they have that signed contract, then they're really going to get rolling on your closing. You know, they will have already done the quick check of the title to make sure the seller really has title. There's no cloud on title. They'll make sure there's no liens before you put any money in, you know, before you bind yourself in the contract. Sorry, got myself confused. But then they will go and do a more in-depth title search. They're going to start soliciting the documents, the certificates of no liens from the various municipal and federal government. They're going to start the process of either transferring an existing fideicomiso trust if you're buying from another foreigner, or establishing a fideicomiso trust if you're buying from a Mexican, and they'll get all of that process going. There's kind of a long, quiet period for you as a buyer at this time, because you're just going to fill out a few forms. You're going to name your substitute beneficiaries for your trust, which are the people that will take the property if something happens to the primary beneficiaries. But other than that, you're really not doing much. It's really a waiting game while we're waiting for all these other processes to go along. And then about 2 weeks before closing, we'll start getting making sure everything's in order. We will have set a closing date. We'll make sure everyone can be here. We will get you the final amount due. You'll send the rest of the money to escrow within at least about 4 days prior to closing. And then we'll all come in and sit at the closing table, and they'll go through your title and we'll sign the deed. Someone has to be at a closing table, either you or your power of attorney. We can't do that remotely. We can do really everything else up to that point remotely, but for the actual closing, we've got to have somebody there, someone physical to appear in front of the notario, either you or someone with your power of attorney. If you think that you are not going to be able to be here for closing just because of timing, we need to know that right away in the transaction, or as soon as you know, because getting a power of attorney in place can take some time, especially if you're not able to come to Mexico to sign a power of attorney. If we need to do it when you're in Canada or the US or anywhere else in the world, I'm doing one in Australia right now, so I'm learning about that. The power of attorney process is a little bit complicated and time consuming. They prepare the power of attorney here, send it to you there, you have it notarized and then authenticated or apostilled by your government. That process takes some time and costs some money on behalf of the seller or the buyer, whoever needs the power of attorney. Then they're going to FedEx that back to Mexico, which also takes time and money. So it's much better if you're able to get a power of attorney in place while you're physically in the country of Mexico. But sometimes that's just not possible. Certainly during COVID, we weren't able to do that. And so we got very good at getting powers of attorney in place. And it's just something that you need to realize up front that you're going to need some time to do.
Kim?
Yes.
Hi. Sorry,
Hi.
it's Natalie and Eric. How are you?
Hi, good.
Hi.
We just
And the
had a
dog.
question.
Hola.
Hola. We had a question about the power of attorney. Is that a difficult thing to set up? Because Eric's brother lives in Mexico. So
Puerto Morelos.
in Puerto Morelos. So we're thinking that if it was a, like, you know, we weren't able to attend the closing, he would act on our behalf.
Yeah, so usually it's not, I mean, if you're not coming to Mexico before closing to sign a power of attorney, then it's a little more complicated. You can give it to whomever you want. We suggest that you give it to the closing attorneys who are also representing you. If you're a buyer, they're already representing you. Rather than just, if like, we don't act as power of attorneys. I'm not a lawyer here and I don't feel comfortable doing that. Whoever's your power of attorney needs to be able to read and understand the legal document that they're gonna sign. So you can do a family member if you want, but I would feel myself more comfortable if you chose an attorney in the closing attorney's office. And it doesn't change your process at all because you're the one that has to sign it. So if you're not coming to Mexico, you've got to sign it there in the US or Canada, get it notarized and authenticated, and then send it back. So it's a little bit of a pain in the ass. I know, especially in Canada, it seems much more difficult than it is in the US, and it's kind of a pain in the US, so.
And do you folks recommend a power of attorney
Like a lawyer.
for us because we don't know any?
Like a lawyer.
A lawyer.
Well, it's usually the closing attorney. So when you have a buyer and you have a transaction, and the buyers, if you're the buyer, you've hired an attorney to represent you. And so that attorney is usually your power of attorney. That's who
Correct.
you give the power to, yep.
Okay.
Because they can read and understand the legal implications of what they're signing for on your behalf and explain it to you, right? You'll see everything before the power of attorney signs it. But yeah, I mean, you can give it to someone else, but it doesn't really help you that much if they don't understand what they're looking at. Any more questions on that part? All right. So when we get to the closing, it's a little bit anticlimactic if you're used to closing with a mortgage lender when you sign 1,000 things. Here, we're really, the big thing that we're doing is signing the title deed, which is actually it comes out of a book that the notario has. Let me back up. The people that are involved, the elements of your closing are, we recommend that you have an attorney representing the buyer's interests so they can explain the documents to you and read them and make sure everything's great and that you're protected. You will have an escrow agent if you're using escrow, and you'll have a notario. And the notario is an attorney who's gone on to get another special designation, and notarios are it's kind of a semi-governmental position. They're the only ones allowed to transfer real property in Mexico. So every real estate transaction involves a notario. The notario kind of stands in the place of a title company in Mexico and is part of the reason why title companies are not common and title insurance policies are not common, because the notario has a fiduciary duty to make sure that title is clear before they transfer title. And they're responsible for it if there's any issues. So the notario is a very important part of your transaction in terms of making sure that you safely are transferring title. And the notario is one of the biggest costs also of your transaction and your closing costs, but we've covered that separately. The thing to know about the notario is that although they have a duty to the transaction, and of course they are also lawyers and they're going to be careful, they don't necessarily owe a duty to either party in the transaction. So they are not advising you on whether you're making a good decision on it, maybe agreeing to, I don't know, separate out your contents from your purchase price or anything like that. They're not looking out for you in any sense other than making sure that they're transferring real clear title. So that's part of the reason I think it's good to have another attorney and also just another set of eyes. I mean, notarios' offices are also very busy and they tend to make mistakes, which can be fixed, but you just don't want to be part of that. So it's kind of good to have your own attorney coordinating everything and then handing that packet over to the notario, which I guess is kind of what Keith was talking about in that sense. Maybe they're more like the realtors in the US, but anyway. So the closing coordinating attorney puts everything together, hands it over to the notario, they look it over, but they don't have a duty to you, to either the buyer or the seller. They have a duty to the transaction and to the government to make sure that all the proper taxes are paid and that there's no lien on, no cloud on the title. So those are the three big players in your transaction. There's also a fideicomiso bank. If you're a foreigner, you're either transferring an existing trust or creating a trust, and the bank is going to be involved in your closing, setting forth the terms of the trust that they're agreeing upon with you. And they will also be signing your title deed. They don't typically send a representation to closing. A representative to closing. I've sometimes had them there, but they're usually not there. So what happens is we arrive, we read through the title deed, you make sure that you understand the terms of the trust, and you would go ahead and sign it, and then it's going to go off to the notario to sign and to the fideicomiso bank officer to sign, and then it will go to the public registry. And that's the part that Jennifer was talking about. The things that you sign on closing day, you are not legal. You can't take a copy of that and say, this is my title, because it hasn't been signed by everyone yet. So once it is signed by everyone, you'll get a certified copy of your title. And that's typically around 2 weeks after closing. Used to be 1 week, now it's 2 weeks. And once you get that certified copy of your title deed, that's what you can use to change your water, your electricity. You know, I don't even think you need it for internet, but those are the two big things that you need. And then they're going to file it in the public registry, and that's going to take another 6 to 8 months before you get your final title deed out of the public registry. When that final title deed comes out, it's I don't have one right handy, but it's a large document, and it's going to have all the attachments showing that the taxes were paid, showing that there's no liens, there's certificates of no liens. It has the IDs of all the parties. It's really complete. It has the whole history of your property, who's owned it, you know, the chain of title, all of that is going to be contained in that final title deed packet. Which now takes around 6 to 8 months to come out of the public registry. And that one you really only need for two things. One is to change the name in the city tax office to show that you're the owner of the property, because for some reason, the public registry doesn't talk to the tax offices around our state. It doesn't, well, actually, it does in Playa del Carmen, so I don't know why it doesn't do it in Puerto Morelos, but they don't notify our Catastro, is the name of our tax office here. They don't notify Catastro that the property has changed title. You need to go in with your title deed, change the name on the record in the tax office, and that'll be done. And the other time you need it is if you need a building permit. They're going to want to see your actual title deed to confirm that you're the actual owner of the property. They won't accept a certified copy. They don't need to keep it, but they want to see it. So you go in with a copy and then you show them your actual title deed. Other than that, you're really not going to have any use for the real title deed. Any questions about that? Come on, guys. I need a sip of my wine.
Kim, I'll say something real quick. Bruce, I think I want to say a silver lining sort of thing about buying property in Mexico, having sold real estate in the United States. The process here is long, but it's in many ways it's more secure and going into the process, because in the United States there are certain things that can really derail your purchase. The type of construction that we normally see in the United States and in Canada is more prone to hidden defects than what we have here. The construction here, the houses that you buy here are basically concrete boxes. You can sort of look at and see what's going on with it. If there's not huge water stains on the walls or anything, you can be fairly assured that there are no issues, as opposed to the timber and drywall and asphalt shingle construction in the United States and Canada, where you can have termite or dry rot or this, that, the other. So I feel like just as far as the construction goes, there's more in the US and Canada that can be wrong that will affect your purchase. The other thing is that cash purchases aren't the norm in the United States and Canada. So there's always a lender involved, or almost always a lender involved, which means there's an appraisal. The appraisal can derail your transaction. And then there's always issues with the lenders. In the US, when I was working in real estate, we always said it's the bank. The bank always messes everything up. So I think that compared to here, going to the transaction here, it's a little more straightforward. You come to an agreement with the seller as to the price you want to pay for the property. You have the money to purchase. You both want that to happen. And then we go into the transaction. And even though the transaction takes a long time, there's not as many things in the transaction that can just go kablooey as you're going through the process as there are in the United States. So that's the silver lining I was talking about, that yes, it takes a long time and it gets frustrating waiting for the close, but just know that the wheels are grinding, they keep moving. Sometimes it seems like nothing is happening, like nobody's doing anything and they're all at the beach having a margarita or something, but rest assured, everyone's doing their job, the lawyers and the fiduciary bank and the notario, and everything's just, it's moving along. And once you get in the groove and you're going through the process, I just find there's so much less here that can sneak up on you and derail your purchase compared to in the States. That's my silver lining.
I have a
That's
question.
good. Yes.
Is the process the same for buying just a piece of land? Like if I wanted to buy the piece of land right next to my house, is that the same as actually buying the house, buying something that's already built on?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of closing?
Yeah, in terms of, I know negotiations would be the same, but yeah, in terms of closing and in terms of whether the land has a house on it or it's just a piece of land, the whole process is the same. And you need the same people in line, the notario, the attorneys. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same people are going to be involved, the same team, you need an attorney and an escrow agent and notario. It can be a little more complicated to buy land here because of the situation in those gated communities, that most people who bought land in those gated communities have never taken title to it. And I think if you've been on here before, we've talked about this many times, the developer in fact encouraged you not to take title. Even if you built a house on it, they encouraged you not to, because they said, oh, well, if you're just buying it to sell it, or you're buying it and you're going to build a house and then you're going to sell it, you don't need to take title because it's a cost to you. Just pass it on to let the buyer do it, which was always terrible advice and has really just made it a huge nightmare. So selling a lot can be a little bit more complicated because it's actually two transactions. One, the seller needs to take title from the developer and then sell it to you. So
How do you find out who actually owns that piece of land if there's not a sign on it?
You don't. That's what I'm saying. It's all private. You can't find out. You can ask your neighbors and see if they know, but you can't. The HOA can't legally tell you who owns it. The government can't tell you who owns it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the trick. So finding lots and buying lots here is like the reason why my hair is white. It's really difficult.
Okay.
It's really hard. I mean, it can be done. Obviously, we sell lots all the time, but it's not ever seemingly it's not a straightforward deal.
Okay.
And not to and then the other thing is that most of the people who purchased those lots were Mexican, and they were smart. They speculated and made an investment, and the investments really paid off. But many times they don't want to use escrow, and they only want to get paid in pesos, and they won't, it's just a little more difficult and culturally in that sense too. But it can be done, right? It just might take a little longer and look a little different than what we're used to.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Jennifer here. Let me see here. You talked a little bit about needing a final title deed, which takes 6 to 8 months. Do you need to have that to do any building on your property, like, or updates? Okay.
Well, you're buying a condo, so you're not gonna need a building license.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you're doing interior work, you don't need a construction permit, yeah, so you won't need that.
That's good news.
But I think, I don't actually, Keith, well, you didn't add square footage. I feel like if you're building a house,
Mhm.
maybe I'm wrong. I feel like I thought that you had to have your final title deed to get a construction license, but I might be wrong on that. They might accept the certified copy. I could be wrong on that. And I could check with the developer pretty quickly.
We'll talk later. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Anyone else? Christine, you're very quiet. I like your background. I think that's it for me. And I apologize. I had a really good, I have an outline. I have this thing that I'm gonna have people download and I went completely off the reservation, sorry. Any questions about the buying process and what that looks like?
Kim, that final document that you get, you said that it lists the history of the home. Is there any chance that it lists all the prices that it was sold at, or is that,
No.
so you don't know if you had a good deal or not?
Well, I mean, that's so dependent. What someone paid for the property in 2000 when Puerto Morelos was 3 streets and 2 of them were dirt, you know what I mean? Like, that's not going to tell you much about, I mean, I guess you can feel good because the value went up so much, but yeah, I don't know that that's a good way to figure out if you're getting a good deal. But yeah, values have really increased in just the last few years because of the demand has really outpaced the supply here. Anything else? Any more questions about Puerto Morelos buying anything? No, okay. Thank you so much, guys. In the absence of an MLS, I would encourage you to just take a look at Point Two Homes if you're looking and send us what you're interested in. Also keep an eye on our website. And I don't know if you're signed up for our newsletter. We do a weekly newsletter and we talk about new listings, not just our own. So things that we think that our clients will be interested in, we want to let you know first. And or we post it in our group, which is called Puerto Morelos Life and on Facebook. So those are great places to watch as well. We want you to be the first to know because things are moving so quickly. So we want you to know about it as soon as we know about it. All right, thank you so much for joining us
Kim,
tonight.
Kim,
Yeah,
I would like to thank you for taking the time to help us and educate us because there is so many unknowns in buying down there and buying in Mexico, especially when you're doing it from the States and or Canada. There's so many unknowns. And so it's very helpful to have a trusted source on that side, on the Mexico side, to be able to rely on, to tap into and go, hey, where are we in this? And
what's happening?
Right, exactly. What's happening? It is very different from the US. I can't speak for Canada, but it's very different for us in this process. And so we do appreciate your time in educating both us and everyone else.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I know I would be scared too. So I get it.
Yes.
Like we want to, and we want you to have information you can rely on because there's so much misinformation out there. So I understand it's hard. You can't just Google it because you get 1,000 different answers. So we like to just meet people, talk face to face online. Just give you some.
Well, we appreciate your
you can rely
time.
on. All right, thank you guys so much. We will be back in 2 weeks. And Laura, I don't know, did Laura leave? Oh, I don't remember what our topic is. I feel like we're talking about what to do before you
I don't have
move.
my notebook here.
That's all right. I think it's what we're assuming your offer got accepted and we went to closing and then we're talking about what to do before you move in our next
Perfect.
chat. And then we'll be doing an Ask a Local chat, which is really fun. You guys keep your eye on that one because that's a great time to ask people who've already made the move what they would tell you not to do, what they would have done differently, what worked well for them. And it's so great to hear all those stories because I can only tell you my perspective. Keith can only tell you his, Laura could tell you hers, but it's good to hear from different people. So yay, take care. Happy March, happy St. Patrick's
Thanks
Day.
so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening. I
Yeah,
appreciate
you
your
guys
time.
too. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye, take care.